Keith Peters, SRN News, Washington.
The Labor Department says productivity fell at an annual rate of 1.7% during the January to March quarter after increasing at a 2.3% rate in the fourth quarter of 2012. The falling productivity, coupled with a slight increase in hourly compensation, led to labor costs going up 4.2% in the first quarter. Labor costs had fallen in the previous 2 quarters.
Amazon expanding its Sunday package delivery service to more than 15 cities across the country, including Philadelphia, Oklahoma City, New Orleans, and Dallas. Sunday delivery available to Amazon customers for no extra charge. With business, I'm Andrew Stewart.
We hold these truths to be self-evident.
In the land of the free and the home of the brave, Americans today are a little less free. I'm Shannon Gessling, and we are Southeastern Legal Foundation. Since 1976, Southeastern Legal Foundation has taken on the tough fights, protecting property rights, free speech, economic liberty, and holding government accountable when it goes too far, just like our friend Ed Dean does every day. Learn more at southeasternlegal.org.
Need a new car? Come on down to Crazy Jerry's, because I'm slashing prices like crazy. Want a beige 1972 sedan? We got that. Or how about if you want a beige 1972 sedan? We got them in beige, and in beige.
You expect options everywhere else in life. Are you getting them when it comes to your medical treatment? Explore all your options and talk with your doctor about what's right for you. Knowing your options is the best option. Learn more at ahrq.gov. That's ahrq.gov. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
All right, the webcast is up and running, ready to go. If you want to watch us live on the air, just go to eddeanradio.com, eddeanradio.com. The intolerance from the liberal left based because why? Somebody wants to give a small 1-minute prayer at a local town hall meeting. If you don't like it, then fine, show up late to the issue you want to be hand at. To my conservative friends, if they don't give a prayer, big deal. To my liberal friends, if they do give a prayer, big deal. I'm not there based on a prayer, and I'm not there based on whether they do a Pledge of Allegiance, which I think is what we need to do. I'm saying is the most important business is the business at hand on what the city's about to implement. Regulate, deregulate. Now, I'm just kind of curious to some of my liberal friends, if you don't like God, tell me, when you put your hand over your heart, if you even do, when it comes to the Pledge of Allegiance, to all my liberal friends out there, do you kind of move your hand away when it says one nation under God? Well, this is coercion into religion. Then don't stand up, don't recognize it, then don't bow your head. This whole thing about forcing you into prayer and blah, blah, blah. I mean, what if the city of so-and-so wanted to have a moment of silence to Allah? Hey, you know what? I don't care. That's their business. I don't approve of it, but I'm not there whether or not they give praise to Allah. I'm there on whether a city council is going to vote on an issue that is more precedent and more important to me. The party of intolerance is the Democratic Party. The party of intolerance is the liberal left. If you don't believe me, let's go back to the clip that we have to 2012 and the Democratic National Convention where they booed God. Remember this?
It requires a 2/3 vote in the affirmative. All those delegates in favor say aye. All those delegates opposed say no.
By the way, I'll replay the clip one more time. This is about inserting God, one word of God, into a small sentence in the platform at the DNC. Here it is again.
Opposed, say no. In the opinion of the... Let me do that again.
And see, what is happening is that the guy there right now, was it Martin O'Malley? I don't know who it was. They were trying to make sure that, yeah, the news media is watching. We do want God in the DNC platform. And the majority of people out there saying, no, we don't. Again, here it is.
All of those delegates in favor say aye. All those delegates opposed say no. I guess.
You've got a rule, and then you've got to let them do what they're going to do. Rules.
I'll do that one more time.
Oh, boy.
All those delegates in favor say aye. All those delegates opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 have voted in the affirmative. The motion.
Here it comes.
And the platform has been amended as shown on the screen. Thank you very much. Thank you.
They are booing. Hold on. Let me knock my volume down. They are booing having God inserted into some sort of recognition at the Democratic National Convention. Here we go again. Here's another one right here.
In 2008, the Democratic Party platform made one reference to God, but 4 years later, that has changed. In this year's document, there is a section devoted to faith, which credits the work of religious charities, but the word God has been removed. In other notable changes, the Democrats' platform supports same-sex marriage and abortion rights, but does not recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Greg Clugston, Charlotte.
There's your Democrats there for you. And am I here to the broad blanket that says that every Democrat is an atheist or doesn't like God? No, I'm not saying that. In fact, you had a decent chunk of those there that said, yeah. But when you look at almost 50% or more of the Democratic Party or those at the National Convention that don't approve of the name God, again, it's like holy water to a vampire. What is going on here, folks? Is there something in the water that I'm unaware about? And yet, anything to do with God. And again, I get into this argument. I get into these debates with these guys on Facebook. And I know most of these guys are gay because they're out there talking about their marriage, or whatever, and putting their little selfies. Okay, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But if you don't like the Word of God, fine. There's things I don't like in the Democratic Party platform, but I'm not annoyed because you want to present it. I'm not annoyed because you believe it is the scriptural fact of how we deem the society should be after by implementing more of a welfare society out there. I tolerate it, but yet there is no tolerance from the liberal left. Let's go back to when Brett Baer was interviewing Illinois Senator Dick Durbin, and watch Dick Durbin just go out. He's berserk about Brett Baer from Fox News asking, well, why did you guys want to take God out of the DNC platform here?
God out of the platform. Why do that?
Well, I could just basically tell you, if the narrative that is being presented on your station and through your channel and your network is that the Democrats are godless people, they ought to know better. God is not a franchise of the Republican Party.
No.
Those of us who believe in God and those of us who have dedicated our lives to helping others in the name of God don't want to take a second seat to anyone who is suggesting that one word out of the platform means that the Democrats across America are godless.
No. I don't think that that's what's being said. We're reporting what's in the platform. In 2008, God was mentioned once. In 2004, it was mentioned 7 times. In 2000, God was mentioned 4 times.
So
it's just a question. The question is why take it out in this time.
What I'm basically saying to you is that you're trying to draw some conclusion that the Democrats are godless. Present your evidence. Present your evidence.
I'm just asking the question, why was the word taken out?
I'm just telling you, you are harping on a trifle. We know that both parties are devoted to this country. Both parties are God-fearing parties.
Really? Both parties are God-fearing parties, and yet almost the majority, if maybe so, the way it sounded like that, the majority of those at the DNC convention didn't even want the word God inserted. Was it like God was going to be on the seal of the DNC platform? I'm not sure. That's how you thought it was going to be. And yet Dick Durbin, these guys are getting all ticked off over the name of God.
Let's get on with the agenda about creating jobs in America, about justice in this country.
And we're going to talk about that in a second. We're talking about the platform here, and there are 2 changes that we just noted. 1, that God was taken out from 2008 to 2012, and 2, that Jerusalem is not mentioned. So I'm not drawing conclusions. I'm just asking you why those changes were made.
Brett, let me suggest something. I chaired the platform committee for 2 Democratic conventions. We produced the most unread document in the history of American politics. To suggest that this document and the insert...
All right, it's just enough of it, all right? The bottom line is that why? Just tell me why. And I'm going to answer your here it is. Why is it that you guys the gay lobby, the atheists, all the liberals out there that don't even want to. Listen, I was willing to compromise. I said, I'll go with a moment of silence. Oh, we can't even have that because somehow it's coercion into a religion praying to God. I mean, really? A moment of silence? I mean, a moment of silence could be from a guy coming from a local mosque, or, I mean, he could be praying to Allah. It's a moment of silence. And yet you don't even want that. Your distaste for God. And yet this is, you know what's funny about this, folks? They call me crazy for believing, as my good friend John Woodard posted, they call me crazy for believing in a God that I cannot see but based on faith, and yet they are obsessed with the God who they claim that doesn't even exist. You tell me who's more crazier. Yeah, I'm waiting. And yet the issues could be about something with your property. Your issues could be something to do with the homeless. Your issues could be about your taxes going up. And the liberals don't care. They only care, well, if it's just going to mention God in a prayer, and that's the only reason why we're going to complain. And yet, the fallacy of the liberal movement out there is they don't care about the issues because, as they presented, they're just all worked up. I'm not saying all liberals. I mean, the good chunk of them out there that are protesting this prayer in the Supreme Court is all they care about God. And somehow that the First Amendment, the separation of church and state, by the way, which they have no clue what they're talking about, separation of religion, not so much from religion. And by the way, these are the same people that don't believe that religion should be involved in politics. Okay, so they sit back and say, well, if they're going to get involved in politics, then they need to pay taxes. You know what I say? Fine, I'll pay taxes. Then the next thing you know, oh my word, they're still obliterating the free speech out there, and the right-wingers, they're a bunch of Nazis, and they're paying taxes. Now what's next? Now we should pass a law that doesn't allow them to do it. My friends, if liberals had their way, God would not be on the coin. God would not be on the Pledge of Allegiance. God would not be in the prayers in front of Congress every day, by the way, which all happened also underneath Nancy Pelosi. God would not be at the National Prayer Breakfast. God would not be recognized at the Supreme Court. I mean, that's the bottom line. They just want God out of the atmosphere. But yet I need to be tolerant for a group of individuals out there that want to promote same-sex marriage and to talk about it in elementary schools. And if I don't agree to that as a parent, then I am intolerant. It just doesn't make sense.
That's right, baby. We're here, we're queer, and get used to it.
Yep. And you know what? I show tolerance, and yet I can't get the same type of respect. So you know what? I'm intolerant of your intolerance. And you guys sit behind a computer. You won't come on the radio show because you're too chicken. You're too cowardly. Because why? Again, it's safer to shoot from up atop. Because heaven forbid that I might get down and I might get shot back at him. Or I might get play a little hand-to-hand basketball or combat. And I might get hurt. And yet, they take the First Amendment out of context. The Founding Fathers talked about God, didn't talk about a certain religion like those in the liberal left believe, because everyone believes that the Anglican faith and the Baptist faith and the Church of God faith, that they all agree. To my same-sex buddies out there, those of you that encourage same-sex marriage, okay, whatever. Do you know that the Anglican Church and those of the Episcopalian faith have actually recognized lesbian priest ministers? They actually recognized same-sex marriages. And you keep deeming that it's all one religion, and it is not. Again, you show your ignorance. You are a donkey's rear end is what you are. Because you don't know what the First Amendment is all about. It was more about having a church state, not the individual state like Florida, Georgia, but as a state referred to as the federal government, a church and state. That is what they meant. I mean, if they were going to talk about states, then they would have said that. By the way, there wasn't all the states that were initially there when the Constitution was agreed upon. I don't agree with any state having a theocracy. I don't agree with any state having a church-run religion. But I will tell you, if a community wants to, like the Amishes, if a community of 1,000, whatever, says, no, our community wants to pray to the sun god. And that's the God we worship. And every week before a city council meeting, we'll have a prayer to the sun god. You know what, folks? They have the liberty to do that. Hence, what is loud with the 10th Amendment. What is silent in the Constitution is left to the interpretation of the states. I may not agree with it. All I'm saying is and I don't, they have the right to do that. Oh, and I'm getting Facebook. What if they want to pray to the Church of Satan? As stupid as your comment is, yeah, they've got the right. They have the right. Even though this country was founded on Judeo-Christian, and now we've expanded, and by the way, to the liberal left, that I was supposed to accept the Muslim faith, I was supposed to accept well, fine. Because your comments totally sideswipe the Muslim faith, sideswipe the Christian faith, the Jewish faith, and whatever faith out there. Your point is your argument is weak. Your argument is not on target. There are many things that I don't agree with. When I go to a town hall meeting and somebody's out there promoting same-sex marriage or liberalism, they have every right to say that. I don't agree with that. There are those that would say, hey, I'm intolerant of that view, but yet my question is they coercion the city council to make everybody accept same-sex marriage? I would never say that. But yet the liberal left believes, well, because somebody gives a prayer, a moment of silence, they are coercing everybody. Technically what they're saying is they're forcing everybody to accept that prayer. As I said before, if you believe that there's a separation of church and state the way that liberals think it is, then I got news for you folks. Then we shouldn't be using polling places like churches. We shouldn't be using polling places like synagogues. We should be using polling places like private Christian schools. Because why? They need areas for people to vote, but yet they're voting inside a church. Why is that acceptable? But the rest is not. And yet, again, the liberal left has no clue of what they are talking about. The bottom line is they want to get rid of God in the community. And then you say, well, we're going to force these people to pay taxes. All right, fine, then you let them pay taxes. No, now we want to that's what they said on the Facebook messages yesterday. Now we want to get rid of them. We don't want them. There should be no place in the public square for religion. Really? I mean, if we really want to go down this road, do we sit back and say, okay, fine, do we get rid of a college scholarship because they may want to go to a religious school? Because why? You're taking taxpayers' money towards a religious entity out there. We don't want to have school choice. We don't have any of this stuff. Folks, it is all misplaced. And yet I don't understand why they are so angry over having a small prayer for a minute or a moment of silence. And yet the real angerness could happen 30 minutes down the road when I'm ready for the reason why I'm there is to see how my county commission or my school board member is going to vote. I don't give a flip about a prayer. I care more about why I'm there that evening, which is the reasoning why I'm there, and that means I'm curious to see how these people are going to vote. The intolerance of liberals towards God is so insane. Back in a few moments. This is the Ed Dean Radio Show.
Just turn it up.
This is SRN News.
In testimony before Congress, companies including Aetna, WellPoint, and Blue Cross Blue Shield said the percentage of those paying health care premiums is north of 80%. Democrats seized on the figures, claiming the law was a success. But Republicans at the House hearing said plenty more questions remained, including whether rates will rise next year and by how much, and how many of those covered were previously uninsured. Greg Clugston, SRN News, Washington.
Arizona Republican John McCain wonders why on earth Burwell would even want to take over at HHS.
Who would recommend their friend take over as captain of the Titanic
after it hit the iceberg.
Burwell acknowledged many challenges, but still defended the goals of Obamacare.
The department's work to ensure accessible, affordable, quality health care through the implementation of the Affordable Care Act is making a difference in the lives of our families and our communities while strengthening the economy.
If confirmed, Burwell would replace outgoing HHS Secretary Kathleen Sebelius. Linda Kenyon, SRN News, Capitol Hill.
The 12th graders performed better in reading. Almost 4 in 10 reached the level known as proficient or better. Scores in both subjects from 2013 have remained stagnant from when the National Assessment of Educational Progress was last given to this grade back in 2009. The poor showing seems likely to reinforce concerns that a large number of high school graduates show up for college and the workplace unprepared. Education Secretary Arnie Duncan says the country must do better for all students. Bob Agnew, SRN News.
2 Samuel chapter 5 tells how David raided the Jebusites' fortress of Zion and took it, establishing the seat of his kingdom in the city known as Jerusalem. Now archaeologist Eli Shukran believes he's found the ancient ruins of the fortress, saying the whole site we can compare to the Bible perfectly. Shukran's dig has uncovered a massive fortification of 5-ton stones stacked 21 feet wide, as well as the water shaft David's men used to get in. Michael Harrington, SRN News.
More details at srnnews.com.
Letting you down easy, but just give it time. If it don't hurt now, but just wait a while. Another big fish in the pond, no more. You will work the beaches now. So what you gonna do when the world don't open up on you? What are you gonna
All right, more of the Ed Dean Radio Show. Heard all throughout the state. The email address, eddeanradio@gmail. The podcast, the webcast is up at eddeanradio.com, eddeanradio.com. Twitter is at eddeanradio, facebook.com/eddeanradio. My good friend from her very popular blog, politicalhype.com, Mariana Mancuso. I just, the intolerance is just, it's amazing how people show their rear ends. On these issues. Because I don't go out of my way to say, hey, I'm against those of same-sex marriage. I'm just like, listen, you guys want to do what you want to do. You're not accountable to me. You're accountable to each other and to God, whatever. You know what? You do whatever you want to do. Just like, for example, they don't want me to put, quote, religious views or conservative views in certain places of the school, and yet they're all willing to put their same-sex marriage type of a liberal mentality in the schools. And I'm like, listen, where's all this tolerance level at? And for them just to get all petty about not worrying about an issue that's going to be coming up present, but instead they want to just, Mariana, they're just all worked up because heaven forbid there should be a 1-minute prayer that acknowledges God or just says, hey, would you please give wisdom to the city council? And they're so worked up over this. I don't get this.
I totally agree with you, Ed. I don't really understand it either. I can remember growing up and going through school, people were all up in arms over prayer in public schools. And I'm going to tell you, I heard one of the greatest things, and it was as long as there's testing in schools, there will be prayer in public schools.
Ah, that's a great one. I like that.
It's so true. I mean, you know what? Who are we to step on that? You can't control when someone's going to pray, and if you don't want to participate, then don't.
Well, the new answer to prayer will be marijuana, because now when you're testing for schools, and right now, especially you're in college, and the prayer won't do you, then I think a marijuana will do you.
Maybe after the test. I don't know. I'm always praying before my exams.
No, that's true. But some of these guys that were claiming that with this marijuana debate that underneath the auspice that you could get one of these over-the-counter type of a marijuana, drug for the medical legalization that a doctor can prescribe you. And the argument from the state attorney's office was like, hey, wait a second. Underneath this law that you guys are putting now on the ballot, it says that if a college kid is stressed from studying, he can go out and take a tote.
I guess, like I said, going back to the prayer in schools, as long as there's testing in public schools, there's going to be prayer. And then people are going to be getting marijuana regardless if it's legal or illegal. And so I think that this debate is it's being drug out. And right now it's waiting for the governor's signature.
Let me get more of the intolerance. I want to get to Hillary in a few moments. And I already had this up. Go to Deadline.com. The Home Guarding TV had recently these two brothers. It's called Flip It Forward. They're anti-gay activists, and now they have been, because of the gay activists, the pro-gay activists, the HGTV says that they're not going to renew the show this year because they found out that these guys are out there holding a prayer rally outside the Democratic National Convention back in Charlotte in 2012. Are you kidding me?
That's just ridiculous. And what kills me is that these are the same people saying that the Republicans are stepping on our rights as Americans, and we're being big brother to death. I mean, you're either saying that or you're going to be the one displaying it. And what we found is that we're finding that the liberals are more intolerable than the Republicans.
You know what we're finding with many of these progressive liberals out there? For example, it's like the marijuana debate, give us medical legalization. And we all know that it is a segue, not for other drugs. It is a segue for open legalization of full-blown marijuana like we're seeing right now in Colorado. And see, but they're not going to be honest about that. But you and I both know that's what it is. And my point is that I would tell those on certain areas of the conservative aisle and on the liberal aisle that if you want a certain type of an issue, then use it for that issue. If you want to go forward with it more, then at least proclaim you're willing to do that. For many in the gay lobby, and maybe it's just, I'm not throwing them all in the same circle here, but many of the forerunners of all this, they come back and the spokespeople say, well, we want special rights and blah, 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 and that's all they claim to be. And then next thing you know, but we don't want it being preached against at the churches. Oh, well, wait a second. If you're going to do it, you want to tax you. And then we find out that, and I say tax the churches if they want to do that. And next thing you know, then they want to make it legalize or make it illegal for them to have their freedom of speech, not the gays, but the ministers that speak against the same. And then next thing you know, they want to teach us in the public schools. I mean, my point is that it just becomes an agenda further and further. So the point I'm saying is what they're claiming about civil rights and equal rights, it doesn't stop there, Mariana. They want it to go further.
Oh, absolutely. It's if you give an inch, they're going to take a mile, and they're going to continue to move the line in the sand every time you get to it. So there's never going to be, a final destination. It's going to be, well, we want this, well, now we want it this way, and they're just going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing.
Do you believe, again, I'm going to get to Hillary in the war on women here in a few moments. Do you believe that well, that the issue of gay marriage, I believe it is a state issue, all right? Having said that, is it the flavor of the month, or is it just the flavor of what that state believes? Because, again, over the last 10 years, many states, 60+% have said, hey, we don't approve of same-sex marriage. Now, the trend may be turning around, but I don't think this is like, you remember 20 years ago, the abortion argument. If you were pro-life in a pro-choice state, you couldn't win. Of course, that wasn't shown to be true. Is this just a flavor of the month, or is this like going to become a big issue among both sides?
Well, I think it's going to be a big issue on both sides. When I was in Hawaii working on lieutenant governor's race, we saw they were trying to pass through the state house there. It was House Bill 444, and it was to grant civil unions among same-sex couples. And I will tell you, as a Republican, I was anti-civil union bill, and the reason is because it violated the sanctity of marriage. It absolutely jeopardized the institution that we knew of a marriage between a man and a woman, because it allowed anybody, not just same-sex couples, to go into a civil union, which is like a business contract, but anybody could do it. And so I think that we're going to see this become more relevant as we go into the election cycle, because these people are going to want to have and argue against either gay marriage, they're for gay marriage, or they're anti-gay marriage. At this rate, I think, if the same-sex couples want to get married, then they have to get divorced just like regular people, because at the end of the day, heterosexual couples not only get to have the joys of being married and the tax credits, but they also have the joys of being divorced and going through all of those things.
The joys. For some, it is a joy. For others, it is not. As they say, sometimes in order to get to the joy, you got to go through the pain.
Right.
Let's switch topics here. Hillary Clinton, the war on women, and it's all, of course, perpetuated by the Republicans. This is reaching here, but follow me for a second. Have you been watching? Do you watch like Megyn Kelly and like O'Reilly at nights when you get a chance?
Yes.
Okay, I'm usually up later, so if I don't catch the early part, I watch them later on. Then have you seen these stories, for example, about the one judge? Was it out in Texas? I'm not sure which state it was, where the poor black girl, basically the judge. The girl got raped, said her virginity was taken, and the judge was kind of questioning her character. And the bottom line is that the rapist, I guess, I'm being conservative here, maybe the numbers got like maybe less than 60 days. I mean, you see these cases in O'Reilly where the rapists against women are getting less than 1 to 2 years, and I'm sitting back going, wait a second. Several of these judges are Clinton appointees or Obama appointees, you know what I would do? To me, that is a war on women. When you sit back and say the man gets less than 1 to 2 years, when years ago these guys would get life in prison for rape, you talk about a war on women, I would sit back and say, look at the Clinton appointees, look at the Obama appointee justices. They are weak on crime, they're weak on women, which means their appointees don't care about it. Hey, to me, in retrospect, that is somewhat of a war on women.
Absolutely, and you know what kills me is that nobody will bring that up. And when we see the Obamas and we see everyone campaigning on that, nobody will ask them how tough they're going to be on crime. But if it is a female candidate, that's the first question to come up. How can you be tough on crime? How can you make sure you're making the right decisions? How can you balance your work and your family life and being a wife and being a mother? Nobody's asking those questions of the Obamas and the Clintons in the political arena.
Yeah, it's the more I look at it, it's interesting because, you know, she brought up the issue of guns this past week about how the gun culture is way out of balance. And, you know, it's amazing because usually I thought she would stay away from this issue because Obama was very smart to stay away from, I'm talking the general election. Now, the primary, you know, the clinging to the guns and Bible, he needed to get the liberal left. I mean, most people, as I said on yesterday's show, I had this debate with Kevin Derby. I said, I understand maybe why Jeb is going out of his way, and really Jeb is going out of his way to talk about how we need to include more of a he's not saying it, but we know it's more of the backdoor amnesty plan when it comes to those here illegally here. The only people that talk about this are people that believe they have a green light, they think they're going to win no matter what, or people that aren't going to run because they can say anything. On the issue of Hillary, why would she go now? I mean, maybe I'm wrong, as I think, you know, maybe I would suppose she has a green light to the nomination here, but why would she go out of her way to make a comment, you know, in this early of a stage when you know that many of these blue states, there are many individuals that carry guns? I don't understand. Why do you think she would go out and say this comment this early?
Because she's trying to pivot the media conversation to that, instead of the fact that a select committee has been formed and is now going forward with an investigation on Benghazi.
Okay, what does that have to do with guns?
She wants to take the heat off of what's going to come out in this investigation, and she wants to now say, well, we're going to talk about this issue instead. Just like she's coming out about saving our girls and the girls that have been captured and that we're going in to rescue, she's trying to keep away from it. There was a recent poll that was just released through Pew Research, and 15% of respondents polled saying that Benghazi was a blemish and was going to hinder their ability to vote for Hillary Clinton. And she's even publicly admitted that that is a blemish on her record as Secretary of State.
Yeah, I can understand. You know, that's a very interesting analogy there. My point is like when Clinton with the scandal, you know, bombing Iraq and the was it the aspirin factory when they thought it was a hangout for terrorists and it wasn't there. They did that during the middle of impeachment. This was already done when the investigation was going on. Well, I'm just saying, I kind of agree with you, but why would you do it this early in the game when nothing's really been presented at the Benghazi trial, Benghazi hearings right now?
Because when you are working as a communications consultant, the thing you want to do, you want to get ahead of the story.
Okay.
And she is afraid of what's going to come out in the Benghazi investigation, and she's afraid of what's going to be exposed and how that's going to damage her reputation. So she wants to get ahead of the story and pivot the conversation into her field, because once everyone's following what she's saying about guns and where she's standing and what she's doing, they're not really worried about what's coming out in the investigation anymore because they're hanging on to every word she's doing. So she's trying to control the conversation.
Why do you think Jeb is going out of his way to talk about the immigration? I understand he probably wants the money. I think he's running. What do you believe?
I do think he's running, and, you know, I've been saying that for a few months now. I think he is running. And, you know, we slowly see him coming out and doing things, you know, whether he's endorsing people throughout their elections and making different appearances. And he's been very coy about it, and he did say that into the summer he'd be making a decision. So I think in the next month or so we're going to look to see his decision come out.
Yeah, I've just been curious. I mean, usually, like I said, most people that make comments, they get away because they're not running. But then again, with all these comments here, I mean, is it still, again, very wise because this just is not popular among the Republican base?
It's not, but you know what? He's getting press for it, and as they say, any press is good press.
All right, well, no, not in this. It isn't. I don't buy that anymore. Any press is good press. You know, so all right, well.
Well, I think for Jeb Bush, I think it is. It gets everybody talking. The people that don't like him are talking. The people that do like him are talking. So he's got his name out there, and people are hearing what's going on with him.
Yeah, but I mean,
so
in a Republican primary, that's what I'm getting at. I just don't know why they would say this stuff as of early right now.
Well, I mean, who is his real contender in the Republican Party?
Yeah, but it's still
not
too
Marco.
early. I mean, I know that, but I mean, do you think he has got a green light towards it? I don't.
I don't think anything is a guarantee. I think that's one thing that we've learned over the course of the past election cycles. Nothing is a guarantee to a nomination.
All right.
But I don't think that this is going to hinder him this early in the game.
All right, Mariana Mancuso from PoliticalHype.com. Thank you, as always, for coming on today.
Thanks for having me on, Ed.
All right, coming up next, Shannon Gessling from the Southeastern Legal Foundation. The White House has come out with their climate change, global warming, whatever you want to call it, has come out with a climate change report. We're going to talk about that and also about more of the Supreme Court's decision in a prayer in schools. More coming your way. Plus, Charlie Crist says that he left the Republican Party because of racism. We got the clip. It's absolutely hysterical. Back in a few moments.
With SRN Sports, I'm Patrick Foss. Indiana Pacers All-Star center Roy Hibbert went into Wednesday's playoff game with Washington with a combined total of 37 points and 24 rebounds in Indiana's first 8 playoff games. Last night, he scored a season-high 28 points and grabbed 9 rebounds in Indiana's 86-82 win over the Wizards.
Tonight, I just felt like I just had one thing on my mind was to help this team win. And like I said, my teammates did a great job of getting me the ball in my sweet spot and believing in me. And I just wanted to return the favor.
The series tied 1-1 heading to Washington. In Oklahoma City, the Thunder achieved a split of the first 2 games of their Western Conference Series, beating the LA Clippers 112-101. NBA MVP Kevin Durant had 32 points, while backcourt mate Russell Westbrook had a triple-double. Thunder head coach Scott Brooks.
It was a very competitive game, and in order to win in this league in the playoffs, you've got to play like that for 48 minutes. I thought we did a good job of competing on every possession.
This is SRN Sports. Tonight's NBA playoff action will see Brooklyn at Miami and Portland at San Antonio. The Heat and the Spurs both up 1-0. In the NHL playoffs, it was Pittsburgh 4-3 over the New York Rangers. That means the Penguins lead the series 3-1. And center Brandon Sutter says his go-ahead shorthanded goal was a turning point in the game.
Yeah, it's huge, especially in a series where it's a critical moment in the second period. And, we're up by a goal, and we take a couple penalties, kill them off, and manage to get that one.
Tonight, Boston plays at Montreal. The Canadiens leading that series 2-1. Also, it's Anaheim skating at Los Angeles. The Kings up 2-0 in that series. If you like the coverage NBC provides of the Olympics, you'll welcome the news that the network has secured the U.S. broadcast rights to the Olympics through 2032 in a record 6-games deal worth $7.75 billion. With SRN Sports, I'm Patrick Foss.
WEJF Palm Bay, WKFA St. Catherine.
With SRN News, I'm Rich Thomason in Washington. Trey Gowdy, the Republican congressman who will head a new probe of the Benghazi attack, suggests that he'll re-examine all of the issues surrounding the deadly assault. That includes some questions previously dismissed by many lawmakers. For example, a House panel concluded that the U.S. military couldn't have responded in time to save Ambassador Chris Stevens and 3 other Americans. It's a familiar refrain.
Where are the jobs?
For House Speaker John Boehner.
Since the beginning of this Congress, nearly 40 jobs bills have remained stalled in the Democrat-controlled Senate.
And that number may soon be nearly 42 as House Republicans prepare to pass 2 more jobs bills this week. One to make a research and development tax credit permanent. The other bill aims to expand access to charter schools. Boehner says good education is key to getting ahead in this economy. And speaking of jobs, number of people applying for unemployment dropped 26,000 last week, falling to 319,000.
The decline in applications follows 2 weeks of increases, which reflected mostly temporary layoffs around the Easter holiday. With the impact of the holiday fading, applications are returning to pre-recession levels. The average for April was 312,000, the fewest since October 2007. Because applications are a proxy for layoffs, the decline suggests that companies are cutting fewer jobs.
SRN's Jeremy House. Also at SRNnews.com, Syrian state television reports a last group of rebels has left the central city of Homs, which was once a rebel stronghold in Syria. Bombings and shootings today have left 6 people in and around the Iraqi capital of Baghdad dead. Bloodshed continues in Iraq. This is SRN News. Sylvia Burwell answers questions about Obamacare at her Senate confirmation hearing to be the next head of the Department of Health and Human Services.
Arizona Republican John McCain wonders why on earth Burwell would even want to take over at HHS.
Who would recommend their friend take over as captain of the Titanic after it hit the iceberg?
Burwell acknowledged many challenges but still defended the goals of Obamacare.
The department's work to ensure accessible, affordable, quality health care through the implementation of the Affordable Care Act is making a difference in the lives of our families and our communities while strengthening the economy.
If confirmed, Burwell would replace outgoing HHS Secretary Kathleen Sebelius. Linda Kenyon, SRN News, Capitol Hill.
Prosecutors in South Korea have detained the head of the company that owns the ferry that sank last month. The accident left more than 300 people dead or missing. More details at srnnews.com.
We are sorry for your pain. Sorry for the stress. Israel's Prime Minister and he insisted that the war did not end with the threat of follow
All right, it is the second hour of the Ed Dean Radio Show, where sometimes the show is more exciting off the air than it is on the air. The webcast is up and running. If you want to watch us live on the air, you can go to eddeanradio.com, eddeanradio.com. Twitter is at eddeanradio, facebook.com/eddeanradio, and the email address is eddeanradio@gmail.com. This always gives a good legal perspective. Here on the radio show with us every week is our dear friend Shannon Gessling, who's the executive director of the Southeastern Legal Foundation. Their contact information is southeasternlegal.org. So I want to talk about the White House, climate change, and all that stuff in a few moments. The Supreme Court, the prayer, in English, what did the Supreme Court basically say last week about what and what cannot be done at town hall meetings?
You can have invocations and prayer before they start their meetings. And as long as you include everyone in your invitation or with reason to be inclusive, then you're good to go. How's that for non-lawyery?
Is it a prayer that can be to Allah? Is it a prayer that can be to Jesus? Is it a prayer that can be to the sun god? Were they descriptive or distinctive of what prayer can only be to?
Well, the nice part about it is what they did is they didn't say what you had to pray to. They really said that the insistence by these plaintiffs that it be non-sectarian.
What does that mean? What does that mean?
That means non-religious, basically, without reference to God or Jesus Christ or Allah.
Right.
Basically an innocuous prayer that isn't supposed to offend anybody if somebody was actually going to be offended who was in the room. So that was what they wanted. They basically wanted to take religion out of a religious invocation or a religious prayer. That's what the plaintiffs wanted to do. Well, the court said no, that's contrary to our history. That's contrary to how it's always been done. We need to recognize and that it's consistent with our prior precedent. And so the great news is that, the United States Supreme Court has spoken definitively that legislative prayer, while it is religious, has long understood to be compatible with the Establishment Clause.
Do you know what it is to me? It is, for example, we acknowledge Christmas as a religious holiday. We acknowledge Thanksgiving as a religious holiday. To me, it's not that the government, and I'm just going to be honest with you, because many of you on the liberal left are giving politicians too much credit for thinking this way. It's just been a tradition. It's been a tradition to put up the nativity scene in front of a city hall. It's been a tradition to have a prayer in front of a town hall meeting. I don't think the county commission or your local city council is right wing or left wing on the issue of prayer. I just think it's just been a tradition. We just do it and let's get on with the business.
Well, it's a distraction, Ed. I mean, just distracting away from serious issues. If you want some other memorial to your religion, then have it. But, you know, the idea that just because you put up a nativity scene means that you're establishing a religion, well, of course, it's counterintuitive. It's counter to precedent. It's counter to our history. And frankly, you get to the point where it's just silly. And, you know, and it's a waste of energy. Let's talk about real problems in our country.
Right. There you go.
That's not one of them.
I mean, my point is listen, Shannon, you are a good friend of mine, all right? I mean, I love having you come on. I look forward, my guests having you come on. And when you and I talk, all right, and you know I'm the son of a Baptist minister. I am glad my dad was a minister. I am glad my dad wasn't an engineer, no offense, or a lawyer. But anyways, I'm just kidding. But anyways, my point is I've never been ashamed of that. And that kind of gives me a little bit of credibility on this issue. Not saying I have the full throat of credibility, but what I'm getting at here is that even as a son of a minister, I can sit back and say, listen, I don't care who you pray to at a city council meeting. If your local city council wants to have a prayer to the rock god, I don't care as long as it's a minute long, because the most important precedence at that night is what's going to take place an hour or 2 hours later here, Shannon, after public comments, is about whether or not the city's going to do this, the city's going to zone this, the city's going to raise taxes on this. To me, that is the most important issue. No disrespect. I support having a prayer. I support the Pledge of Allegiance. But if it's not enacted, I'm not offended by it.
Well, I mean, I appreciate what you're saying, but, you know, the history of having an invocation or a prayer isn't for the audience. It's to convey to the people that are on a county commission or in the legislature the importance, the weight of their responsibility, and for them to take pause and think about what they're doing, what actions they're going to take that are going to affect a lot of people. And that's a very important responsibility. It started in Congress, but we've done it historically to really set the stage, the feeling, the moment of the importance of what people do when they're in public office. That it isn't just about themselves and what they want. It's about what's good for their community at large.
Then would you wait? Hold on. I'm not really disagreeing with you, but in that case, let me play devil's advocate. Would you? And listen, I don't think it should be more about a minute prayer. Just get in and get, because the people's business is what's more important. What I'm getting at here is that would you invite a prayer? Now I know I'm being facetious here because as a former news reporter, I've covered this many times. I rarely saw this, but the bottom line is do you invite a prayer that sits back and says, by Shannon Gessling or Ed Dean, and by the way, dear Lord, tonight there's going to be an issue on taxes. I pray that the city council does not jack up my. I mean, next thing you know, it's a sermon going on. See, I don't advocate that.
Yes, but the important part is it doesn't matter what Ed Dean advocates, and it doesn't matter what Shannon Gessling advocates. What's important is that the United States Supreme Court has said we're not going to question your content. We're not going to be your, the people that edit, and neither should the legislature. Right. You have to stand up in front of the group if you want to be on the list. You say what's in your heart or on your mind, and we're not going to be the editors of it, because that's not the role of government.
You know what? You make a valid point. Basically, and without saying, the Supreme Court basically says if the city council wants this, they can do it. If they don't want it, they have the same right to not have it either.
That's correct. And they go a little further than that because they talk about the idea, there's a lot of discussions. I use the word censorship, censorship or editing, that, the argument on the other side was, I want to have purely non-sectarian and you need to check the content. Well, that is something the court addressed previously, and they are just not going to get into the habit of having the government, because then you get into a First Amendment question, right? I mean, then we go into First Amendment freedom of speech beyond the issues in the Establishment Clause, and they said, no, that's not the role of government to censor. So, I mean, I think it's important, have it or don't have it fair, and no, you don't have to have it as exclusively non-sectarian. So, I mean, this is an important clarity that we needed, and it's important because it addresses the audience. You have who the audience is. They've revisited that question, and it was not joined by everybody, but that there's a fact-intensive inquiry, Ed, about who the audience is. So there may be some future cases having to do with school board meetings or other meetings where there are children, because, of course, the Lee versus Weissman case. But which was a high school graduation.
Right. Hold on. Now, let me interrupt here. Let me interrupt for a second. By the way, Shannon Gessling from the Southeastern Legal Foundation here on the Ed Dean Radio Show. If the left is so anti-religion, first off, my question is, well, what religion, Shannon? I mean, you've got the Catholic faith, the Episcopalian faith, the Baptist. I mean, they all don't agree, so I don't know what religion they're talking about, number one. Number two, if there's this separation of church and state, which I want to get to in a moment, but follow me for a second. Then if that's the case, then why do people vote in a church? Why do people vote in a Christian school? If that's the case, then we should not be voting for a elected official in any type of religious establishment.
Well, it's an interesting point you make, and that there's often been complaints by similar advocates and similar petitioners that that's exactly right. There shouldn't be voting in a church. But let's be honest. A church does not control how you vote. Right. It's a building, and they're offering it to their government for use because this is, you need a local place. So it's,
I'm with you.
Again, let's talk about serious issues. Let's not talk about what the building is that you're going to vote.
Explain to me, I've had some liberals email me at Facebook, and they have said, well, wait a second. Of course, they don't understand the separation of church and state and the First Amendment, but they have said that, well, wait a second. That this is in the Constitution, so it means that if it's in the federal Constitution, then it should not have to take place at a local county commission or at a local municipality city council. How do you address that issue?
It's called the 14th Amendment, Ed. It's the federal Constitution is incorporated into the state.
I understand that.
And so, and historically, towns, legislatures, general assemblies, city council meetings have also followed Congress's historical use of an invocation to begin or open their session. So you still have historical precedent for it, even though the historical precedent starts with Congress. State legislatures followed suit. So that argument just doesn't.
Okay,
really
well, that's why I said it's a devil's advocacy question. I'm saying it now because comments from the liberal left. Now, here's a question: if the state of Maine, because we know that the Church of England, many people said, the freedom of religion, and the reason why they left the Church of England because it was a church-run state, not the individual state like Maine or Texas, but the state overall, like the state of the Union. If Maine wanted to have its own church-state religion and the people voted in favor of it, is that constitutional?
Interestingly, that's a very pointed question, and arguably, according to a couple of our justices on the Supreme Court, the answer is yes, because the prohibition against establishing a religion historically is a prohibition against the federal government from having a religion, not a state religion. However, that is the historical perspective, and a couple of our justices do advocate that position pretty strongly anytime there's a case. However, the general understanding of the average person is that we would have an expectation that there would not be a state religion.
Right.
I don't know how the Supreme Court would come down on that, but I would argue that a common sense perspective rather than a legal historical application of constitutional law kind of thing, I'd step away from that and just step over into common sense. We are at a place in our history that it would be counterintuitive for any state, including Maine, to have a state sponsored religion.
Shannon Gessling with the Southeastern Legal Foundation out of Atlanta, Georgia. Their contact information is southeasternlegal.org. I've had Christian teachers that have emailed me talking about, because I made the point. Yeah, I understand where you're coming from. I endorse having a prayer before a town hall meeting and a pledge of allegiance. If the liberals don't like it, then fine, you can take your hand off your heart, especially when it comes over under one nation under God. I'm sure they probably do that. And I've had teachers actually sit back and have agreed with what you've said, that, for example, in the good old days, when you had a school prayer, it set at the first thing in the morning, whether every kid agreed with it or not, it set the tone for the rest of the day. In fact, many of them said, it was much more influential as a tone than reading off what was on the food cafeteria calendar for today in the morning, what they were going to have. I understand where you're coming across with that. But to me, whether I have a school prayer or not will not determine, with all due respect, whether or not I don't have any kids, but whether or not my son or daughter passes that grade and passes that FCAT or that SAT scores. And what I'm saying is that a prayer at a city council, I'd like it. It's tradition. I support it. But I'm saying if a city council does not have it, to me, I'm not going to sit there and lose sleep because I'm there to see how the city council is going to determine a zoning ordinance or whatever there. That is what I'm getting at.
Well, let me play devil's advocate for you for a moment.
All right.
Would you be offended or bothered by a city council or a local government stopping their historical practice of an invocation because of a threat of litigation? Would that offend you?
I've seen.
In other words,
I've covered that.
50 years we've had this invocation, and you get a letter from one of the more liberal organizations advocating against invocations, that if you don't stop doing a prayer, we're going to sue you.
No, because that's extortion. I wouldn't do it because it's extortion. Out of principle, I wouldn't do it.
So that would bother you. That bothers you.
Well, no, but I mean, but hold on, but Shannon, but as you as a lawyer and me who's covered many court cases, a former news reporter, I would be curious. I mean, you laid out an interesting conversation or an analogy. I would go a little deeper. I would sit back and ask the people, okay, like whether it's ACLU or whoever, why? I mean, can you give me a certain reason why it's offensive? I mean, did somebody give a prayer that was 10 minutes long or should have been 1 minute long? I mean, and my point is there are those out there saying, well, we got 5-minute prayers. Okay, what if I give it to 1 minute prayer? Would you be happy? What I'm saying is I would sit down and find out what was their reasoning, and then I would sit back and go, okay, fine, we can't get together. Hey, I'll see you in court. That's how I would address it.
Right, except for the fact that, your local governments are run by tax dollars, and everything is always tight, and you look back at the recession, they were even more tight. So there were successful threats of litigation before Town of Greece was decided that basically various city councils and county governments stopped the practice because of a threat of litigation, even though they were legal. That, to me, is a bullying tactic that we should not, that we need to turn around and ask our legislature at whatever level to say you need to return to the policy of having an invocation because your reason for stopping was not a valid reason.
All right, let me throw one back at you. What if there, and I don't know if there is, I'm just saying this has been a traditional thing for city councils throughout the country. What if there was a city council in a very liberal city, but for the last 20 years they have not had an invocation. In fact, they've had a moment of silence. Let me just say, they've had a moment of silence. And then you get some conservative, some church-going leaders in there, and again, I'm playing devil's advocate, that sit back and say, well, if you don't have a prayer like the city down the road, we're going to turn around and sue you. What would you say to that?
Say that. I apologize. Say that again.
Okay. What if you had a city council? Let's pick a state like California, very liberal, that for the last 20 years they have not had like an invocation. Instead they've had like a moment of silence. All right.
Sure.
And let's say that you get some church-going people that come into and you're just looking for a fight. Instead, what they're doing is they're going to sit and tell the city council, hey, listen, the city 5 miles down the road has an invocation of a prayer to whoever. You guys don't. If you don't do it, we're going to sue you because we believe that this is a religious country and you're not doing what we think is traditional. We're going to sue you because you're not having an invocation. Where do you stand on that?
You can't argue. It's an interesting question. But the hypothetical doesn't work because, 1, you have a standing problem, 2, you have a ripeness problem, and 3, you can't force them to do something that they didn't want to do.
I agree.
It's different than stopping somebody from doing something they're doing than forcing them to take an action. You can't force the city council by litigation to have an invocation, but you can try to stop them by suing them because you're offended by it.
Okay, that's fine.
You feel your constitutional rights are being infringed.
All right. Listen, when we come back, let's talk. This is a good, sexy issue. I like this issue. Now, let's make the next issue even much better. The White House has come out with their climate change report. Shannon's been covering this. I want to get more of this, what this was about. And are there any lawsuits coming down the pike because of supposedly man-made, gas-made emissions? We'll talk more about this on the other side of the break. This is the Ed Dean Radio Show.
Name. Oh, I know you're no good, but you're stuck in my brain. And I want to know, why does it feel so good but hurt so bad? My mind keeps saying, run as fast as you can. I see your girl, but then you pull me back. Oh, I swear you're giving me a heart attack.
With an SRN News Business Brief, I'm Andrew Stewart. The U.S. removing special trade benefits for Russia over the Ukraine conflict.
President Obama has notified Congress that he's removing Russia from the Generalized System of Preferences program because the country is now too economically developed to need the benefits. The White House also said Russia's involvement in Ukraine made it particularly appropriate to take this step now. The White House says the action means imports of Russian goods will be subject to normal tax rates. Greg Clugston, SRN News, the White House.
The Transportation Department has issued an emergency order requiring that railroads inform state emergency management officials about the movement of large shipments of crude oil. And shippers have been urged not to use older model tank cars that are easily ruptured in accidents, even at slow speeds. The order especially notes shipments of so-called Bakken crude from the region of North Dakota, Montana, and parts of Canada. Several fiery incidents in Canada and the U.S. prompted the order. Keith Peters, SRN News, Washington.
The Labor Department says productivity fell at an annual rate of 1.7% during the January to March quarter after increasing at a 2.3% rate in the fourth quarter of 2012. The falling productivity, coupled with a slight increase in hourly compensation, led to labor costs going up 4.2% in the first quarter. Labor costs had fallen in the previous 2 quarters.
Amazon expanding its Sunday package delivery service to more than 15 cities across the country, including Philadelphia, Oklahoma City, New Orleans, and Dallas. Sunday delivery available to Amazon customers for no extra charge. With business, I'm Andrew Stewart.
We hold these truths to be self-evident.
In the land of the free and the home of the brave, Americans today are a little less free. I'm Shannon Gessling, and we are Southeastern Legal Foundation. Since 1976, Southeastern Legal Foundation has taken on the tough fights, protecting property rights, free speech, economic liberty, and holding government accountable when it goes too far, just like our friend Ed Dean does every day. Learn more at southeasternlegal.org.
All right, more of the Ed Dean Radio Show. Shannon Gessling from the Southeastern Legal Foundation. Their contact information is southeasternlegal.org. So the White House has come out with their latest climate report because it's settled. Remember, that's what he said. It's just settled here. Science never changes, and the weather never changes too, Shannon. All right, it's all done by man. The polar ice caps are still melting. You know, we got the hottest weather. Even though we've got some of the coldest weather on hand as well. So the White House comes out with this climate report. What is it that they say that has, well, I mean, that has many conservative, even other scientist groups out there? Like, I've had the NASA scientists come on my radio show going, hey, these things are just totally are able to debunk of what the White House puts out. What is it out there that's angering a lot of businesses and a lot of conservatives out there?
Oh, well, the list is pretty long, but basically It's a 1,300-page report led by 300 scientists, and it is basically the same as what we've been seeing since the 90s in Al Gore. Same alarmist, coercive language. It's real. No American is going to go unscathed. It's a present danger. And basically, you know, this is the same old type of rhetoric to drum up political support during a campaign season. And there's, you know, even more to the point, they're using the new report. This is pretty startling. They're using the new report to justify a whole new raft of regulations designed to kill the coal industry in America and severely restrict the development of fossil fuels in America. I mean, we are literally sitting on the world's largest reserves of oil, natural gas, and coal. And the clean air regulations have already made use of these products far more environmentally friendly than before. So why the big push to cut back further? You know, that's a good question.
Well, my question is how do we go from global warming to climate change?
Well, because the globe is not actually warming. So that's a problem when you have a title that doesn't actually apply to the facts. And I don't mean to sound sarcastic, but that's actually the answer. So because the globe is not warming and that we haven't increased temperatures in quite some time, they had to change it to climate change. But of course, common sense also says climate change, well, of course the climate changes. It runs on cycles, usually about a 1,500-year cycle.
Right.
So, the science that they throw up about climate change is wrong, but, we already know there's climate change. It's modest climate change. I think the key for all your listeners is whether the climate change is man-made, right? And the U.S. has the lowest carbon emissions today than at any time since 1992. We've rolled back man-made emissions, and at the same time, global carbon emissions are up. So that tells you it isn't a U.S. problem, it's a global problem. So U.S. regulations are not going to affect global emissions.
Yeah, basically, hold on, wait. You kind of are saying that if we're going to use regulations, use the ones we already have. Instead, they want to enforce more regulations when actually the regulations we have now seem to be or have seemed to be doing the job. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm saying that you don't need more regulations when the Environmental Protection Agency admits that their climate change regulations have no net change to global temperature. Okay, so it's going to cost over $1 trillion over the next decade,
right,
and it's going to be tens of millions of jobs, and at the end of it, there is no change to global temperature. That is a tragic and costly mistake of epic proportions.
So
there is no sense to it.
For example, I've always said, as a former news reporter, because I've covered a lot of this, that gas emissions put out by Mount St. Helens in Mountain Pinatubo of an eruption are more than any man-made products ever combined. Would you agree with me on that?
I have no idea, Ed.
Oh, well, you don't have to agree with me. I'm a male. I already know. All right. So anyway,
okay.
I'm just kidding. It's a joke. But what I'm saying is that Florida 10 years ago had ravaging hurricanes, and yet their hurricanes over the last 10 years have not declined. They have majorly declined after Hurricane Katrina that has actually been produced out in the Atlantic or in the Gulf out there. That when you look at some of the weather out there, we had record temperatures. For example, down here when it comes to snow, I mean, no, we never get snow in Florida. We had some this year. I mean, it's once every 10 years. I mean, you've had record cold temperatures going around, but yet guess what? That's not global warming. That's because of climate change, and somehow that's because of gas emissions. But yet, Shannon, I was told that the reason why that we have global warming was because of the gas emissions made by man that got stuck in the atmosphere, that did not evaporate, and that was what was causing global warming. Now I assume, guess what, Shannon? It's also causing tornadoes. It's also causing the cold weather we have as well. I can't keep up with it.
Right. Global warming is causing cold weather. I mean, if you said that, without all of this backdrop and context, wouldn't you just laugh at somebody who was standing across from you? I mean, this is the silliness. So now, basically, global climate change, man-made global climate change, is the reason for all our problems. And that's why the U.S. should, create this draconian regulatory regime where the President of the United States controls every aspect of our economy. Look, if it is a global problem, and I think it is a really big if, okay, if it is a global problem, the focus of that statement should be global. So if every single week, week in and week out, India, China, and the developing countries are building one new coal-fired electric plant every week, there can be no effect to these regulations. We are basically sacrificing the economic well-being and affordable electricity in our country and getting nothing in return.
By the way, if you want to look at the last political hurrah about fixing global warming, was the cap and trade that couldn't even muster enough votes to pass in the Democratic Senate back in 2009.
Right. And I come back, the reason Southeastern Legal Foundation really is in a position to speak about this because we've been involved in this from the beginning. Okay. We've got our litigation pending at the U.S. Supreme Court. And I return to the premise that, when the Solicitor General of the United States stands up before the court and says that this is a horrendous problem that requires immediate attention, Well, my question is, if that's common knowledge, and the court should know it, and Congress should know it, the question comes back to exactly what you said, which is everybody knows this is a problem, right? Then why isn't Congress passing legislation to address it? It is because everybody does not agree it's a problem, that the evidence doesn't demonstrate that it's a problem, that the models don't predict that it's a problem, or if it does, they can't replicate in real information and real data, and it's global in nature. There is no way for the United States to deal with this as a problem, but I'll certainly be daunted if we should give it over to the Environmental Protection Agency in the White House. Let's get our representatives to address it. And the reason they're not addressing it, because it isn't a problem, that's why cap and trade didn't pass, and it's why the president is using the pen and the phone. You've got to come back to the first principles of what are the goals of this presidency. And the goals of this presidency have been laid out quite clear. He is going to destroy coal production and coal-fired power plants in this country. He's going to use his pen and his phone if he can't persuade Congress. And he's going to pay lots of our tax dollars, millions, billions, trillions, towards these industries that are not actually producing economical energy for the American people.
Shannon Gessling is the executive director of the Southeastern Legal Foundation. Their contact information is southeasternlegal.org. Let me ask you this. You have been in, or are still in these lawsuits, which I think you can answer this question. You're still in these lawsuits with the EPA. The EPA has sat back and said, we're able to do this. Now, this is a rhetorical question, but I need an answer. Because of, and this is where I want to insert the because of, and then if I'm wrong, I need you to insert the because of. They're able to sit back and say we can overstep our boundaries. Is it because they believe that there are laws that have been made up by Congress that have allowed them to do this? Or is this something that they're able to do because of an executive order by the president?
Okay, I can't answer what anybody believes, okay? What I can tell you is that the conduct is a combination of things. It isn't just by executive order, but it is based on executive leadership. If I don't get cap and trade, we will, pursue regulations. And it is regardless of the clear meaning of the Clean Air Act. Okay, so you've got leadership, the President of the United States, unsuccessful in his bid to get cap and trade passed. That failure spoke to how he would address it. So he's going to snatch victory out of the jaws of failure, of defeat, and pass regulations that are far worse and that's what he promised, they would be far worse than cap and trade. And that he's staying true to his promise.
Because let me try to use and it was a good answer. I might just try to use a different analogy. For example, we're going to have in contempt of court, as was passed yesterday, with this. I know you follow this as well, but this IRS, how they were going after conservative groups. Yeah, well, we call her Lois Lane learner because she won't. She won't give up her sources. And then you've got the prophet Elijah Muhammad Cummings, the Democrat out there who has been coerced, and of course with her on some of these things out there. This is what I'm getting at. And I've been complaining about this. Either the IRS really abused and went further than what was allowed, or why do we not go after some of the laws that the IRS claims that allows them to do what they do, which you and I believe is abusive, but they say there are these laws on the book. And I guess what I'm getting at is, are there really these laws on the book that allows the EPA to do what it does, like, for example, the endangered species or OSHA, or do they really kind of sometimes make up these things as they go along?
Well, it depends on the case. I mean, the case that just came down this week from the U.S. Supreme Court, the cross-state air pollution rule. Well, the U.S. Supreme Court reversed the lower court that went against the EPA, pretty much 100%. Right. And they said, no, you need to read the statute. If you read the statute, then EPA is doing what they're supposed to do. Do I disagree with the analysis? I do, but the U.S. Supreme Court is tying itself to the language of the statute, and I mentioned to you last week that bodes well for us because our case is all about the EPA ignoring the clear congressional intent and the plain language of the statute. So it's all, there's a lot of gray. Lawyers like gray, Ed, and it's all about a fight. And just because I don't find many of the positions taken by the EPA to be credible doesn't mean that they don't have an argument. I just think you have to act within good faith and intent of Congress. And I don't see that this administration does that.
Forget the administration for a second. Why don't even, I mean, you know this. You know that outside of maybe the financial the industry, which I'm involved with, the most overregulated industry out there, excluding maybe taxes and stuff, is the environmental. I mean, there are cases not to talk about Cliven Bundy, it was turned out to be a creep, but I mean, there are cases where the endangered species is all over the map. You got it in California, you got the tortoise problem in Florida, not only Nevada. I mean, it's all over the map. Maybe it's not millions upon millions that would be recognized by the media, but it's been going on for the last 20 years. And I'm saying this is, why do not politicians address dealing with over-regulations by EPA and the Endangered Species Act in OSHA? I mean, Republicans looked at it 20 years ago when they came to power, and then ever since then, no party's ever talked about it.
Well, I mean, I think you make a good point. I mean, Southeastern Legal Foundation has been litigating against enforcement of ridiculous enforcement of the Endangered Species Act for 25 years. I mean, basically utilizing a law to advance a policy that is contrary to the intent of the law is counterintuitive, right? Hear what I just said. Using a law that is clear to enforce a policy that is absurd is not how it's supposed to be. So, I mean, you know, that's what we've been fighting, and that's exactly, it's over-regulation, it's over-enforcement, it's excessive enforcement, it's over-criminalization in arenas that keep you from having free enterprise. I mean, these all have to do with what are your goals. If your goals are taking people's property and making up a reason to do it so you don't have to pay them, right? Well, use the Endangered Species Act. If you want somebody's piece of property, right, then you should pay them for it. It's called just compensation.
Right.
I've got no qualm about them saying, you know, if somebody walks up to me and says, you know, Shannon, I want your acreage in such and such a county in Georgia because we think it has a valuable, you know, resource, I'll go, great. Pay me my fair market value for that property and you can have it. But you can't take it because you're going to rely on the Endangered Species Act and you found some snail, right? That a snail could live in any single creek anywhere in the southeast and they're down the road.
But Shannon, I'm with you. But if it wasn't for people like you, listen, with all due respect, I shouldn't have to rely on people. I mean, I'm saying this in the right way. I mean, and you know, contribute to the southeasternlegal.org. I mean, do it. But what I'm saying is I shouldn't have to rely on lawyers to do something about slowing down the growth of government or the mandates by D.C. The elected official that I elected him to represent, for example, the agriculture business, and agriculture guys constantly complain about the overstepping of EPA and OSHA. And the bottom line I'm getting at is why aren't our politicians address? I don't care if it's piece by piece, but deal with some of the issues of deregulating the nonsense by the EPA. That's what I'm getting at.
Well, let me just say this. This may be a cop out, but you're preaching to the choir. The inept, you know, if it's not ineptitude, it's inadequacy of Congress. That, you know, my expectation is, you know what I want my government officials to do? I don't need them to pass a single additional law for the next 100 years. What I want politicians in Washington, D.C. to start going through the laws we have and repealing them. Let's get down to some real limited government and some narrowing of focus and get back to some first principles. But that's what, you know, that's the congressman I want to elect, the guy who stands up and actually does it and say, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to convince everybody that we need to repeal the following 50 laws in my first term and demonstrate why they're a total waste. I mean, that's what we need. That's who we should have in Congress. I don't need anybody to fix any more of my problems. I need them to undo the problems they caused.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it would be easier for them to go after the Endangered Species Act because nobody cares about the tortoise or, I mean, no offense, or the dotted snail out in California. But I understand probably why they wouldn't go after EPA because then they get accused of, want to kill young kids and dirty air and dirtier water.
But let's be honest, that it's not when you have policies that we've got clean air, we've got clean water, we've got corporate responsibility, we have a high level of regulation in this country. We are healthier than we've ever been in our history. Do I value the contribution of environmentalists towards that goal? Yes, I do. But now what they're trying to do is they're trying to remain relevant and attacking problems that don't exist. And so let's address problems that actually exist and undo regulations that have no purpose anymore.
Yeah, that would be about 75% of the government. All right, Shannon Gessling. Hey, thanks for hanging out with me a little longer today. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
All right, you're quite welcome. Have a good weekend. Southeastern Legal Foundation, their contact information, again, is southeasternlegal.org. When I come back from the break, for those of you here in Florida, Charlie Crist has stepped into it again, and we got the clip, and we're going to play it for you. Back in a few moments. This is the Ed Dean Radio Show.
This is SRN News.
In testimony before Congress, companies including Aetna, WellPoint, and Blue Cross Blue Shield said the percentage of those paying health care premiums is north of 80%. Democrats seized on the figures, claiming the law was a success. But Republicans at the House hearing said plenty more questions remained, including whether rates will rise next year and by how much, and how many of those covered were previously uninsured. Greg Clugston, SRN News, Washington.
Arizona Republican John McCain wonders why on earth Burwell would even want to take over at HHS.
Who would recommend their friend take over as captain of the Titanic after it hit the iceberg?
Burwell acknowledged many challenges but still defended the goals of Obamacare.
The department's work to ensure accessible, affordable, quality health care through the implementation of the Affordable Care Act is making a difference in the lives of our families and our communities while strengthening the economy.
If confirmed, Burwell would replace outgoing HHS Secretary Kathleen Sebelius. Linda Kenyon, SRN News, Capitol Hill.
The 12th graders performed better in reading. Almost 4 in 10 reached the level known as proficient or better. Scores in both subjects from 2013 have remained stagnant from when the National Assessment of Educational Progress was last given to this grade back in 2009. The poor showing seems likely to reinforce concerns that a large number of high school graduates show up for college and the workplace unprepared. Education Secretary Arne Duncan says the country must do better for all students. Bob Agnew, SRN News.
2 Samuel chapter 5 tells how David raided the Jebusites' fortress of Zion and took it, establishing the seat of his kingdom in the city known as Jerusalem. Now archaeologist Eli Shukran believes he's found the ancient ruins of the fortress, saying the whole site we can compare to the Bible perfectly. Shukran's dig has uncovered a massive fortification of 5-ton stones stacked 21 feet wide, as well as the water shaft David's men used to get in. Michael Harrington, SRN News.
More details at srnnews.com.
All right, more of the Ed Dean Radio Show. If you want to watch us live on the air, you can go to eddeanradio.com, eddeanradio.com. The email address, eddeanradio@gmail, Twitter at eddeanradio, facebook.com/eddeanradio. Charlie Crist running for the Democratic nominee is one of the greatest things for talk radio. If Charlie Crist became governor, it'd still be great for my radio show. The bottom line is I still want him to debate Nan Rich. He won't debate Nan Rich because Nan Rich will be out there showing, hey, Crist. And by the way, Charlie I think I'm up to number 16 right now of the flip-flops or the reversal of his roles here, of Charlie Crist here. And I'm getting my T-shirts. I'm just letting you know, I'm getting the T-shirts out that we had in 2010. We have to update them now for 2014 because of Charlie Crist is now, again, he's the greatest thing around. He keeps flip-flopping on all these issues. Now he's flip-flopped on in-state tuition for illegal aliens or children of illegal aliens. Now he is flip-flopped on why he left the Republican Party. Here's a clip with Jorge Ramos. Is this like with the Telemundo guy? Listen to what he said. And Jorge keeps saying, well, listen, the reason why you left the Republican Party is because of Marco Rubio. He goes, no. Charlie goes, I left the Republican Party because they were a bunch of racists. Play that clip. Here it is right here.
When I saw what was happening with the Republican Party, Jeb Bush said it better than anybody could say it. He said it better than I could. They're perceived now as being anti-women, anti-immigrant, anti-minority, anti-gay.
All right, hold on. Let me stop there for a second before I play the clip. Jeb Bush did not say that in the context that Charlie is saying. Jeb Bush is saying, hey, there are people out there that are claiming, and he goes, it is absolutely not true. Continue to play the clip. That's what Jeb Bush said. Charlie, of course, is misleading you.
Education, anti-environment. I just wasn't comfortable and being honest with myself.
But that's not why you left the Republican Party.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Well, I mean, you left the Republican Party because you were going to lose to Marco Rubio.
No, I left the Republican Party because of Republican leadership.
Hey, can he do that one more? I like the roll off the tongue of Marco Rubio. Can I just hear that one more time?
Anti-environment. I just wasn't comfortable and being honest with myself.
But that's not why you left the Republican Party.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Well, I mean, you left the Republican Party because you were going to lose to Marco Rubio.
No, I left the Republican Party because of Republican leadership went off the cliff. I mean, they're so hard right now. They won't cooperate with the president on anything. It's very disappointing and very discouraging. No, but I'm an optimist. It's going to get better.
I understand, but the moment in which you decided just to leave the Republican Party was because you were going to lose to Marco Rubio.
No, it was because I couldn't be consistent with myself and my core beliefs and stay with a party that was so unfriendly toward the African-American president. I'll just go there. Because I was a Republican and I saw the activists and what they were doing, it was intolerable to me. As I told you before, my mother and father taught my three sisters and me to treat everybody well. We're all children of God. And I saw how the party, some of them, were treating the African-American president. And I couldn't take it anymore. And that's a big part of why I left the party. Sorry, that was...
Wait a second. He left the party? Wait, I'm confused.
I didn't leave the Republican Party. It left me.
Okay, well, he flip-flopped on that. I mean, I guess that's petty. But wait. The bottom line is, I'll get to the other clips here in a moment. He left the Republican Party. Remember, back in 2010, it was over Senate Bill 6 about the unions and taxation. By the way, I had to agree with Charlie Crist. I didn't like that bill. By the way, he flip-flopped on that bill. His chief of staff said, I think we're going to go along with that bill, and then he decided not to do that. And then he said that was the ultrasound, and it was that. That's the reason why the GOP left him, or he left the GOP. Now, out of the blue, it's because of some racism charge? Where? Tell me. I mean, Governor, for 4 years this has been going on. I mean, remember, we didn't like Obama since 2007 when he announced. Why? Because we're racist. Now, even though I'm white privileged, but we're racist. That's what we're told. And yet this charge has been around for 6 years. And now you bring it up? The reason why I left the GOP, the Florida GOP, was because they were a bunch of racists. Do we need to go back and remind people what Charlie Crist was all about?
Attorney General Charlie Crist.
Fighting side by side with Governor Bush for our conservative principles. Fighting for parental notification and defending traditional marriage.
As Education Commissioner,
Crist promoted school accountability, higher standards, and school choice.
And he's the only candidate for governor who has never supported a tax increase.
A conservative we can trust.
Charlie Crist.
Well, I mean, he's flip-flopping all those issues, but I mean, again, it was based on racism. Remember the comments, people having buyer's remorse. He was complaining about Obama. Washington spends too much. He was the one out there saying people had buyer's remorse on Obama. Does that mean that Charlie Crist at one time was anti-black? Was Charlie Crist anti-Obama because he was black? Was Charlie Crist at that one time when Crist, the buyer's remorse, when Charlie Crist was talking about that, was that because at the time was Charlie anti-Obama because he was a racist, because he was black? Remember buyer's remorse on Obama?
Change is what people wanted, but I don't think this kind of change is exactly what they expected. I think that, government has grown too much, too fast, too far. And I think there's maybe a little buyer's remorse by some. And obviously, I think Senator McCain would have done a great job. But
well, I'm just curious. Governor, former governor, I mean, were you a racist at one time? That's basically saying the reason why you left the Florida GOP, because there were a bunch of racists. Folks, I will tell you something. I'm very consistent here on this radio show, unlike Charlie Crist, who claims he is consistent, which he's not. Where was the racism? I mean, where were the comments by Will Weatherford? Where were the comments by Don Gates? Where were the comments from congressmen in the state? Where were the comments from Jeb Bush? Where were the comments from Bill McCollum or Rick Scott or Tom Gallagher ran against Charlie or any of these guys, Marco Rubio? Where are the anti-Obama comments that equal racism here? Now, if you want to sit back and make it up as they normally do, sit back and say, well, the reason why you don't like Obama, Marco Rubio, or the reason why you don't like Obama, Ed Dean, or other conservatives out there is because he's black. I've heard of that for the last 5 years. I'm used to it. But that's not what he's saying. He's saying that the reason why they didn't like Obama was because he was black, because there was racism in the GOP. Then please, can you point me out a specific area where that happened? I'm not asking for 4 or 5. I'm just asking for 1. Give me a known leader in Florida who's been known to make racist comments and made racist comments about Obama in the Republican Party, in the Republican leadership, and I'll give it to you. If that was, that's fine. I mean, it's not true. We know that. But where were the racist comments? And there have not been any racist comments. Now, remember, I love the accent. You left because Marco Rubio. I like that. Now, I want to play the clip here for you, not the whole clip, just real quick, where he says, you left because of Marco Rubio. Then let me play the clip to you by the Palm Beach Post when he was being interviewed, or Charlie Crist was being interviewed by the Palm Beach Post on, well, why did you leave again? Here it is again. You left because of Marco Rubio.
He said it better than I could. They're perceived now as being anti-women, anti-immigrant, anti-minority, anti-gay, anti-education, anti-environment. I just wasn't comfortable and being honest with myself.
But that's not why you left the Republican Party.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Well, I mean, you left the Republican Party because you were going to lose to Marco Rubio.
No, I left the Republican Party because the Republican leadership went off the cliff. I mean, they're so hard right now. They won't cooperate with the president on anything. I mean, it's very disappointing and very discouraging. No, but I'm an optimist. It's going to get better.
I understand, but the moment in which you decided just to leave the Republican Party was because you were going to lose to Marco Rubio.
No, it was because I couldn't be consistent with myself and my core beliefs and stay with a party that was so unfriendly toward the African-American president. I'll just go there.
So unfriendly towards it, but it goes basically because of race. Now let's go back, 2010. Sitting in the interview or the editorial board by the Palm Beach Post. We have all these clips on Charlie, by the way. We have a stack of. In fact, we keep them in a safe just in case people try to break it and doing whatever. Believe me, that could happen from some of you liberal left out there. But the bottom line here is this is being interviewed by the Palm Beach Post, 2010. They were grilling Charlie on why did you leave the Republican Party? I mean, would you have switched if you were up? Here's the question they ask. If you were up by 20 points. Now, hold on a second. Hold on, let me just set this up. Jorge Ramos, you just heard a few moments ago, who just, I wish I could pronounce Marco Rubio. Like, it doesn't work well with me. But he says the reason why you left, Charlie Crist, is because you were going to get beat twice, he said, by Marco Rubio. Charlie goes, no, that's not true. I left because they were unfriendly towards my African-American president out there. But 4 years earlier, I'm going to play the clip. The Palm Beach Post says, hey, if you were up by 20 points, would you have left the Republican Party? Here it is.
20 points up, had been 20 points up in the polls over Mr. Rubio. Would you have left the party to run as an independent?
Absolutely. Yes, I absolutely would have, because I think it's that important. Sure, I would have. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
not what you told us a few weeks before you made the move.
Well,
right.
Things
you were here in late
evolved.
February and just said.
But hold on, wait. You heard what he said. One of the other editorial board members says, "Well, wait a second. You said that you were going to switch. You were going to switch. Did my screen just freeze? Yeah, it looked like it just froze. You were going to switch if you were up by 20 points, or you wouldn't have switched if you were up by 20 points. Now they ask, would you have jumped ship if you were up by 20 points?" He says, of course. And the other editorial board goes, well, no, that's not what you said to us just a few weeks ago. Can I just hear that one more time here?
20 points up in the polls over Mr. Rubio. Would you have left the party to run as an independent?
Absolutely. Yes, I absolutely would have, because I think it's that important. Sure, I would have. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's not what you told us a few weeks before you made the move.
Well,
right.
Things
you were here in late
evolve.
February and just said, I don't see myself running as an independent.
Well, things do evolve and they change.
I don't see myself running as an independent. Things evolve. Things have changed. Wait, a couple weeks early, he told the Palm Beach Post that he wasn't going to switch, but yet he evolved or revolved in 2 weeks. The guy revolves and evolves in 2 hours. I mean, for crying out loud. I mean, he's done it on Obamacare. He's done it on every big issue out there. And yet, you guys, the best you could come up with is Charlie Crist. Hey, by the way, one of the other reporters asked him what they about the car registration. This is what he said about that. Remember the tax fees on that?
Crist approved the fee increase in 2009. He spoke exclusively with NBC2 in an interview today.
What's your response to him hitting you so hard on that increase in vehicle registration fees?
Well, it's a cheap shot.
It's a cheap shot. Now, don't get me wrong. He's not alone in it. The Republicans that are in power today are the ones that gave Charlie Crist that budget. He's not alone, but it's not a cheap shot. It is actually the truth of what happened. His comments about cheap shots are, Rick Scott and his cronies are the one that led us to the Wall Street debacle. I didn't realize Rick Scott was involved. Now, I'm not holding water for Rick Scott. I just tell it the way it is. But the bottom line is Charlie Crist. I'm afraid to do these shirts, man. I may have to do a shirt in May and July, June of this year in July, and then I may have to redo another shirt in August. It's going to cost me too much money because Charlie Crist keeps evolving himself here. I can't keep up with it. I don't know about to keep up with it financially. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow on the Ed Dean Radio Show.